There are stories that live quietly among you, unnoticed, unspoken, but powerful enough to change the course of a life. Welcome to Veil Marks, where we bring those stories to light, one breath at a time. In this deeply emotional journey, you'll meet a man who had given up on love, a girl who saw beyond the veil, and two dogs who never stopped waiting. This isn't just about grief or second chances, it's about remembering what we once buried. As Viktor Frankl once said, "What is to give light must endure burning." Watch until the very end to feel the full weight and beauty of this unforgettable tale. If it stirs something in you, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe. Let's walk this path together. Elliot Ray wasn't a man who believed in ghosts. Not really. He believed in morning routines, in coffee left a minute too long on the burner, in the sound of old pipes groaning awake with the cold. At 72, he had long abandoned the idea that the world held much more mystery than what fit inside his small, aging apartment on the top floor of a once cheerful building at the edge of Crescent Hills. That belief changed on a Tuesday. It had just rained, and the sky was that kind of bruised lavender that made the rooftops look like they were holding their breath. Elliot had stepped out onto his narrow balcony for fresh air, or what passed for fresh air in a town too small for secrets but too old to remember anything clearly. He stood with a mug of weak coffee, staring out like he always did, not at anything in particular. And then he saw it. Atop the roof of the burned-out high-rise across the street, the heart of the neighborhood, now an empty husk, stood a dog, still as stone. A German shepherd, or something close to it. Tall, gray-coated. Lean in the way dogs get when they've spent too much time alone. It didn't pace. It didn't bark. It didn't even blink, as far as Elliot could tell. It just stood there, facing toward him, as if it had been waiting. Elliot blinked twice. He set his coffee down. When he looked again, the dog hadn't moved an inch. The building it stood on had been abandoned for years, ever since the fire. Elliot didn't go near it. No one did. A place like that was too soaked in memories, most of them the kind you didn't say out loud. It was the same fire that had taken Lena, his wife of nearly 40 years, and their dog Kane, a German shepherd with a heart bigger than the whole town. Since that night, Elliot had mastered the art of detachment. He didn't talk to his neighbors, didn't answer phone calls unless they were from the bank. He had no family close by, no pets, no hobbies. Just coffee, the balcony, and a silence that wrapped itself around him like a worn coat. But now, there was this dog. The next day, it was there again. Same rooftop, same time just after 4 o'clock, same stillness. Elliot lingered on the balcony longer than usual, squinting against the late sun, trying to make out more detail. But all he got was the shape of Ittel, alert, staring straight toward him like it knew something. The town had started calling it Ghost Shepherd. He heard it mentioned at the corner store, in hushed tones by kids at the bus stop, by the lady who always walked her corgi around the block twice and muttered superstitions under her breath. Some said it was the ghost of a dog who died in the fire. Others said it was a stray that never left because it was guarding someone. Elliot scoffed at all of it. Until Friday. That's when he met Mira. She was a strange little girl, all elbows and oversized glasses, with a backpack full of paint pens and a sketchbook so thick it looked like it had grown from her spine. She lived with her grandmother, 1 floor below, and he had never noticed her until she wandered up to the rooftop of their building one afternoon. While Elliot was smoking a cigar he'd found in a drawer he hadn't opened in years. She didn't say hello. She just stood beside him, peering across the street, squinting like she already knew what she was looking for. "You see him too," she said finally, her voice calm in a way kids' voices usually aren't. Elliot didn't answer. He wasn't sure what to say. She held up her sketchbook and flipped to a page. It was the dog, drawn in black marker, with sharp ears and sad eyes and a tail that barely lifted off the ground. The background was flames, and beside the dog stood a woman in a long dress, her face obscured but unmistakably familiar. Elliot's stomach turned. No one had ever told Mira about Lena. "You drew that from the rooftop?" he asked, voice dry. She nodded. "And from my dream. But the dream came first." He looked at her, really looked. There was something about her expression, unafraid, knowing that unsettled him. Mira tapped the page. "He waits," she said simply, "for someone who never came back." Elliot turned back to the burned building. The dog was gone. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat by the window, staring out across the street like the rooftop might start whispering to him. In the quiet, he found himself whispering Kane's name for the first time in 5 years. Kane. The name broke in his throat like a stone skipping across frozen water. The dog on the roof wasn't Kane. That would be ridiculous. Kane was gone, the kind of gone that didn't leave room for return. But those eyes, they weren't just watching, they were remembering. He tried to laugh it off the next morning, told himself Mira was just a kid with too much imagination and too little supervision, told himself he was just tired, getting old, seeing things, believing in ghosts because silence was too loud. But when 4 o'clock came, and he stepped onto his balcony with hands that trembled just a bit more than usual, the dog was there, waiting. The dog kept showing up. 4 o'clock, every day, without fail. Sometimes he was on the rooftop. Sometimes on the broken stairwell. Sometimes, Elliot thought, he wasn't anyway only to glance outside and find him already standing there, like a shadow returning to its proper place. Elliot had tried ignoring it. Had tried rerouting his routines, closing the blinds, taking his coffee at 3:30 instead. But nothing helped. The weight of those eyes across the street had settled on him like dust that wouldn't brush off. He was starting to feel watched. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that pulled something buried deep inside him back up to the surface. It didn't help that Mira had started showing up more. She came by almost daily now, usually without knocking, just appearing like some rogue thought in the hallway. She'd sit on the stoop outside his door, cross-legged, sketchbook in lap, muttering to herself as she drew. Elliot, after several failed attempts to shoo her away, had given up. Kids, he realized, were like stray cats. Ignore them enough, and they start believing they live with you. One chilly Thursday, she handed him something. It was her sketchbook, thick and messy and full of crumpled pages. He tried to wave her off with his usual not interested, but this time, she pushed it into his hands and said, "I think this belongs to you." The tone in her voice wasn't playful. He opened it. The first few drawings were familiar rooftops, the ghost shepherd, buildings etched in charcoal lines. But then the pages changed. A woman began appearing tall, graceful, always in a long dress that shimmered even in ink. She was often drawn beside the dog, both of them standing in corridors of fire or fields of ash. Elliot stopped breathing when he reached a full-page drawing near the center. It was Lena, not just some imagined version of her, but Lena, his wife. Down to the curve of her smile, the way her hair used to fall to one side when she laughed. Mira had drawn her exactly as she'd looked the last day he saw her alive. He looked up sharply. "Who told you about her?" Mira blinked. "Told me about who?" He turned the book around, tapping the image. "This woman. This is my wife." "I didn't know that," she said softly. "I've never seen your wife. I just draw what I see in my dreams." Elliot stared at her. "I see her in the fire," she went on, voice almost a whisper. "She's always standing next to the dog. Not the rooftop one exactly, but almost. She wears white. She keeps looking at something far away. I think she's waiting too." He didn't know what to say. Mira stood quietly, folding her hands in front of her, her eyes wide and still. "I thought maybe you should have it. I don't think she wants to be forgotten." She turned and left without another word. Elliot sat on the floor, flipping slowly through the rest of the book. The sketches became more chaotic shadows layered over shadows, flames spilling over rooftops, empty rooms, and broken windows. But always, the dog was there, and Lena, together, watching. The next morning, Elliot went to the back of his closet, to a box he hadn't touched since the fire. Inside was a Bible Lena used to read from time to time. Not often, just enough to underline phrases in faded blue ink and leave tiny pressed flowers between the pages. He thumbed through it until something slipped loose. A letter. The envelope was yellowed, The paper crackled when he unfolded it. It was addressed to him, but the handwriting wasn't Lena's. Losgren. It was his. He didn't remember writing it, but he had. He read aloud. To whoever finds this. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's someone else. I wasn't there that night. I should have been, but I couldn't face her. Not after what I said. Not after walking out when she begged me to stay. And now, I don't know if the dog made it back. I don't know if he ever tried. All I know is I left. Beneath the letter was a notice, one in Lena's handwriting, scribbled quickly on the torn edge of a recipe card. It read, Cain followed the flames. I told him to stay, but he wouldn't. He chose them. He chose them over me. Maybe that's love. Maybe that's what it always was. Elliot sat back, winded like he'd been punched. He remembered that night like a smear of sound and smoke. The fight. The slammed door. How Cain had barked and whimpered and finally bolted out the door behind Lena as she rushed back into the building to check on others. To help. He remembered waiting in the car. Too stubborn to follow. Too broken to stop her. He hadn't seen either of them again. Until now. Until the dog on the rooftop. Until a little girl handed him a journal full of drawings she should never have known how to draw. That night, Elliot couldn't sleep. He sat at the window, the letter in his lap, Mira's sketchbook beside it. He watched the rooftop, heart in his throat. At 4 o'clock, the dog appeared like clockwork. But this time, something was different. The dog didn't stand still. It walked a few paces forward, then turned toward the horizon, then looked back once. Just once. Elliot rose from his chair, not because he had answers, not because he was ready, but because the truth had cracked open the wall around his grief. And now there was a path still hazy, still hard but waiting for him to take the first step. The air smelled of rust and old ash. Elliot hadn't set foot near the old complex since the fire. Not once, not even to look. It had always loomed there, across from his building, a silent monolith of loss. He'd built his life around, avoiding it, crossing the street instead of walking past, closing his blinds just before sundown, when the light hit its broken windows just right. But something had changed now. Maybe it was Mira's journal. Maybe it was the letter from Lena. Or maybe it was Sky. The dog had started moving differently. Not just watching. Not just waiting. He'd begun circling the sidewalk near the chain-link fence that surrounded the burned shell of what used to be Everidge Towers. The dog didn't bark or whine, he just stood at the corner where the gate hung broken, looking back at Elliot, as if to say, it's time. So, that morning, Elliot followed. The wind was sharp, the kind that made his joints ache. His shoes crunched over glass and gravel as he stepped inside the fence perimeter, into a place time had abandoned, but grief had not. Sky padded ahead of him, tail low, head high, confident, certain. The building groaned as they entered. Floorboards creaked under the weight of long-forgotten memories. Ash stained the corners of the once white walls. The smell of soot still clung to the air like a ghost that refused to leave. Graffiti covered parts of the lobby now, a strange blend of anger and tribute. Candles, melted down to waxy stubs, sat along the windowsills. Someone had left flowers here, once. Elliot moved slowly, hand trailing the scorched wall as they passed what used to be the mailroom. Then the stairwell. Then the place where Lena's favorite mural had once stretched across the wall-bright sunflowers, painted by neighborhood kids and volunteers. Gone. All of it. Swallowed by fire. Sky stopped at a rusted metal door, half hidden behind a torn sheet of plywood. It was the old access door to the basement storage space turned, utility room turned, eventually, makeshift storm shelter for residents during emergencies. Elliot hadn't even remembered it existed, but Sky did. The dog pawed once at the bottom, then sat back and looked up. Elliot hesitated. He reached for the handle. It resisted stiff with rust and time, but it gave way with a deep groan. The air that met him was cold and stale, like a breath held too long. He stepped inside. The hallway beyond was narrow and choked with debris. Sheetrock dangled from the ceiling, pipes exposed, wires like dead vines, but it was intact, in a way the rest of the building was not. More preserved, more intentional. Sky moved ahead, careful but steady, until he stopped at the end of the corridor. Elliot squinted into the darkness, letting his eyes adjust. At the far end, a heavy steel door. It was dented and blackened, with soot, but still standing. A thick iron handle, bolted edges. He remembered now this was the old cold storage vault. Lena had mentioned it once, said it felt like a bomb shelter. Sky nosed the base of the door. Elliot moved closer, breath shallow, and then he saw it. Scrawled across the center of the door, scratched into the metal with something sharp, were 4 words. Not spray paint, not ink, not carved with a key or knife. Waiting for Elliot. His breath hitched, his knees buckled. He reached out a trembling hand, brushing the letters with his fingers. The edges were rough, deep, not casual graffiti. This had been etched with force, with purpose, with time. Sky sat beside him, silent, watching. Elliot lowered himself to the floor slowly, joints cracking. He leaned his back against the opposite wall and let the weight of it all settle in. 5 years. 5 years of pretending he didn't remember. 5 years of ignoring the sound of Lena's voice in his sleep, of not looking at Kane's old leash, of hiding his guilt beneath layers of routine. But here it was, written on a door in the belly of a building that refused to forget. He buried his face in his hands. "I left her behind," he whispered. His voice cracked like old timber. And Kane, too. The memory poured in now, sharp and relentless. The fight, Lena asking him to stay, just for one night, just to talk. He couldn't. His pride, his anger, whatever it was, had driven him out into the cold, leaving her to face the fire alone. She'd gone back inside to help neighbors evacuate. Kane had followed her. That was who they were. The brave ones. The ones who stayed. He hadn't come back until the flames had already swallowed the top floors. By the time the sirens faded, there was nothing left to find. Only smoke and silence. Until now. Sky stood and nudged his shoulder gently, then turned his gaze back toward the door. Elliot stared at those words again. Waiting for Elliot. Had Lena scratched them in? Or someone else? Was it Kane? Or was this some strange mix of memory and mercy? He didn't know, but he knew this. Someone, or something, had waited here, and he had finally come back. He pressed his palm to the cold steel. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I should have come sooner." Behind him, Sky lay down, head resting on his paws. The dog didn't speak, didn't move. But in that silence, Elliot felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it, the first step back. He sat with Sky for a long while, just breathing. And when he finally stood, knees stiff and heart heavy, he looked one last time at that door and whispered, "I remember now, and I'm not leaving again." It started with silence. Then came the knock on Elliot's door sharp, panicked, out of rhythm with the quiet life he'd built around himself. He opened it to find Mrs. Langley from 2 floors down, cheeks flushed from cold and worry. "It's Mira," she said breathlessly. "She didn't come home from school." Elliot froze. "What do you mean? Maybe she's at a friend's." "No," the woman interrupted, already shaking her head. "She left class, walked home. Her backpack's by the door. But she's not inside, she's just gone." His heart sank. He knew without knowing Mira had gone to the ruins, the same place he had just returned from. Sky stood behind him in the doorway, as if he'd been listening all along. He let out a low sound, not a bark, not a growl, but something else. A rumble, a knowing. Elliot didn't waste a second. By the time he reached the edge of the fence surrounding Everidge Towers, the sun was bleeding into the mountains and townspeople had begun to gather. Flashlights flickered against the snow-dusted pavement. Someone had called the sheriff. Someone else had started yelling Mira's name. Elliot ignored them all. He didn't explain where he was going. He didn't ask permission. He followed Sky. The dog moved fast, weaving between rubble and half-collapsed doorways with a speed that belied his age. Elliot did his best to keep up, lungs burning, knees screaming. but none of it mattered. The only thing that did was the feeling pounding in his chest that Mira was down there, somewhere deep in the bones of the building. They slipped into the basement corridor once more. Only this time, Sky veered left at the junction, toward a different path, a narrow one, mostly blocked by fallen drywall and a rusted file cabinet. Sky pushed past it with his shoulder, paws echoing on the cement. Elliot squeezed through next. The smell changed here. Less of fire, more of dampness and time. Water dripped from broken pipes. The air was heavy and wet, like it had been holding its breath for years. Then Sky stopped. A jagged crack had split the far wall narrow, crooked, almost hidden behind a collapsed steel beam. From within that crack, Elliot heard it. Not a voice, not a cry, just breathing. Shallow, faint, like a candle trying to stay lit in the wind. He dropped to his knees, ear close to the gap. "Mira," he called. Silence. Thina whimper. Small. Fragile. Not hers. A dog's probing. "Sky," Elliot whispered. "Dig." The dog didn't hesitate. Claws scraped against concrete and dust. Elliot joined him, shoving debris aside, tearing through years of dirt and plaster with bare hands until his fingers bled. The sound of breathing grew louder, still weak, still distant, but there. Alive. Minutes passed. Or hours. He didn't know. Finally, they cleared enough space for him to peer through. It was a crawl space. Dark. Damp. And in the middle of it, huddled against the far wall beneath a half-collapsed metal shelf, was Mira curled up tightly, one arm around something small and white. "Mira!" he shouted. She looked up, eyes wide but lucid. Her voice was a rasp. "He wouldn't leave me," she whispered. He stayed. Elliot reached through, tore at more stone, opened the gap wide enough to crawl in. He slid toward her, pulled her into his arms. She clung to him like a child waking from a nightmare, shaking, soaked in fear and cold. But she was alive, and then he saw it. The puppy, tiny, snow-colored fur, shivering, barely breathing. Elliot cupped the little body gently, cradling it in one arm. The pup's fur was matted, its belly empty. It looked like it hadn't moved in days, but its chest was still rising slow and stubborn. He turned it slightly in his hand and saw it. Just behind the left ear, a curved scar. It looked like flame. Not a wound, exactly. A mark. Almost. Shaped. Like something burned into being. He looked at Sky, who was now lying at the entrance to the crawl space. Eyes locked on the pup. His ears twitched. His body tensed like a sentinel keeping watch. "Mira," Elliot asked gently, "how long have you been here?" She blinked slowly. "Since last night. I snuck in. I wanted to find the door with your name on it." He felt a tear slide down his face. "And the puppy?" She reached out, touched the small head. "I found him. Alone. Cold. But Sky was here already. I think he was watching over both of us." Elliot stared at the old dog. Something clicked. Sky hadn't just been waiting. He'd been guarding, keeping this tiny flame alive in the dark, waiting for Elliot to come, to finish what he couldn't years ago, to save what was still left. Elliot helped Mira crawl out, carefully, slowly, one hand on her shoulder, one arm around the pup. When they reached the surface, the townspeople surged forward. Questions, shouts, relief, applause. He didn't answer any of them. He only turned to Sky, kneeling beside the old dog. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew all along." Sky didn't respond, but he didn't have to, because in that moment, Elliot heard it again. That faint, nearly invisible sound. The soft, stubborn, unmistakable rhythm. The sound of breathing. The hospital room was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes with peace, but the kind that lingers after chaos, like the hush after a storm has passed. But before anyone steps outside to count the damage. Elliot sat stiffly in the chair beside Mira's bed, eyes heavy, body aching. It had been a long night. The nurses had finished checking her vitals and left the room in dim light, letting her rest. Outside, the snow had started again. big, slow flakes drifting past the window like the sky had decided to start over. Mira hadn't said much since they found her. She'd clung to Elliot's coat as they rode in the ambulance, curled in on herself like something small trying to disappear. The pup Flint, as Elliot had started calling him, had been bundled into a warm towel and handed off to a vet tech at the clinic next door. Sky had refused to leave the lobby, lying near the entrance like a guardian statue, unmoving. Now, it was just Elliot and the girl, and the weight of everything they couldn't yet name. He reached for the sketchbook Mira had clutched before falling asleep. The pages were smudged with ash and fingerprints, the spine bent from being dragged through a crawlspace. He flipped through it slowly, page by page. The drawings had shifted again, less fire now, more light, less fear. One page showed Lena standing with her back to the viewer, a hand outstretched behind her. In front of her, a dog Sky, unmistakably faced the same direction, as if they were walking towards something beyond the frame. Elliot didn't notice at first when Mira stirred, but then her breathing changed slow, deep. Her eyelids fluttered, and then she spoke. "He waited," she said. The words were soft, but it wasn't her voice. Not really. Not fully. It was deeper, older, measured in a way children didn't speak. "So long," she went on. He never stopped. Elliot sat up straight, startled. "Mira?" Her eyes remained closed, but her lips moved. "He stayed by the stairwell," she whispered. Even after the smoke came, Elliot didn't understand what he was hearing. "Mira," he said again, gently, reaching for her hand. It was warm, steady. "He chose them," she said. "The others, he followed them into the upper floors when they were too afraid to go alone." "Who?" he asked. But he already knew. Kane. His chest tightened. He could have gone back. Lena told him to, but he didn't. She knew he wouldn't. She knew what you'd do if you saw him fall. She didn't want you to carry that. A tear slid down Elliot's cheek. He remembered that night in pieces, a memory warped by time and shame. He remembered sitting in the truck, fists clenched, refusing to run after her. He remembered the way Kane looked at him before disappearing into the building, a last glance, one Elliot had never understood. "He waited in the stairwell," Mira said. "Even after Lena was gone, he waited just in case." The words pierced through Elliot's ribs like glass. "She thought you'd come back, but when you didn't, she asked him to watch instead, until someone could finish the goodbye." Mira's eyes fluttered. She stirred, blinked, Saturday up slowly. The voice was gone. The child returned. "Did I say something?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. Elliot swallowed hard. You dreamed again." She nodded. "I saw her, and Kane." But this time she was smiling. Mira looked toward the door, where Sky had appeared silently. He padded across the linoleum floor and rested his head on the side of the bed. Mira smiled faintly and scratched behind his ear. "You're not Kane," she said quietly, "but you carry him." Sky didn't move, just closed his eyes. Elliot sat there, stunned. The silence between them, thick with meaning. He looked at the dog, at the crooked patch of fur near his shoulder, the way he never barked, never begged, only watched and waited. A dog who had appeared out of nowhere, who led him back to the truth, to the girl, to the breathing. Sky had never asked for anything. He'd only guided, like Kane would have. Elliot stood slowly, walked around the bed, and kneeled beside the dog. His hand rested gently on Sky's back. "I didn't come back that night," he whispered, voice breaking. "But I'm here now. I'm not leaving." The words felt both old and new. A confession and a vow. Mira yawned and leaned back against her pillow. "I think she's okay now," she said, eyes heavy. "Who?" Elliot asked. "Lena," she replied, without hesitation. "She found him. She's not waiting anymore." Elliot didn't answer. Couldn't. He looked down at Sky, who had shifted to rest one paw over Elliot's shoe, as if anchoring him there, back in the world, back in the now. For the first time in years, Elliot felt the noise inside him quiet, not because the pain was gone, but because someone else had carried it, long enough for him to find his way again. Outside, the snowfall thickened. Later that night, Back at home, Elliot opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit him like a memory, but Skye was there, close behind. They stood together in silence. The house was no longer empty. There was life inside it now. Breath, warmth, waiting no more. Elliot looked at the stars and whispered, "Thank you." And somewhere, in a space between now and memory, a woman in white and a loyal shepherd walked side by side, no longer searching, no longer stuck. Just moving on. The puppy didn't make a sound. Not the day he was rescued. Not when the vet cleaned his wounds. Not when they wrapped him in soft gauze and tucked him beneath a warm blanket. He simply looked. Quiet. Still. Breathing but barely. Elliot sat by his side at the small animal clinic just outside Crescent Hills. He had declined the offer to leave the puppy overnight. Said it softly but firmly. "He's coming with me." There was no discussion after that. He carried the pup home in a cardboard box lined with an old towel. The little body was warm, but limp, and still so, heartbreakingly still. Skye walked alongside them the entire way, every few steps pausing to check the box with a careful sniff, as if counting breaths, one at a time. Back at the house, Elliot cleared space beside the heater in the living room. The box became a bed, layered with fleece, and wrapped in an old sweater that once belonged to Lena. It smelled of cedarwood and lavender-soft things from a time when the house had laughter in its corners and footsteps in the halls. The puppy blinked up at him, but didn't move. No tail wag, no yip, no bark. Just eyes, dark and wide and knowing. Elliot found himself staring into those eyes longer than he meant to. They reminded him of someone who had seen too much and still chose to stay. Someone small who understood silence, not as emptiness, but as survival. "I think I'll call you Flint," Elliot whispered. Skye, lying nearby, lifted his head in silent agreement. Flint. A spark. A beginning. That night, Elliot didn't sleep in his bed. He stayed in the armchair by the heater, waking every hour to make sure Flint was still breathing. Skye didn't leave the pup's side either. At one point, Elliot saw the old dog nudge the pup gently with his nose, then curl his body close, forming a crescent of warmth around him. By morning, Flint moved his head for the first time. He didn't try to stand, just shifted enough to press his tiny face into the crook of Skye's neck and sigh. The sound was barely audible, like a match flickering against a gust, but it was something. Elliot placed a hand over both dogs, his fingers trembling slightly. "This house," he said aloud, voice thick with sleep and something else, "is yours now too." Later that day, he did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He opened the door to Lena's room. It had been closed since the funeral. Not locked, just forgotten in a way that wasn't accidental. The door creaked, and the air inside smelled of old fabric and time. Dust motes spun in the sunlight like dancers suspended in amber. Elliot didn't cry. He simply breathed in the space, touched the windowsill she used to sit by, and began to move. He cleared off the dresser, wiped down the mirror, folded the quilt, dusted the bookshelves. It wasn't about erasing her. It was about making space again for memory, for presence, for light. In the center of the room, on the narrow desk, Lena once used to write letters. He placed 2 framed photographs, one of Lena laughing in a garden full of lilies, and one of Cain, tongue out, ears perked, standing proud beside a younger version of Elliot. He lit a small candle between them and whispered, "You're still here, just a little differently now." Mira began coming by every afternoon after that. She didn't ask permission. She just showed up, sketchbook in hand, usually with her coat half-zipped and a paintbrush sticking out of her backpack. She'd settle at the kitchen table, while Elliot made tea. Flint would rest in a fleece-lined basket near the heater. Skye would watch from his usual post near the door. Mira never asked about what happened in the basement. She didn't need to. Instead, she drew. Every day, a new page, a new scene. One showed Elliot holding Flint in his arms beneath a sky lit with stars. Another had Skye standing guard beside a field of white flowers, eyes fixed on the horizon. And then there was the one that made Elliot stop breathing for a second. It was of him, an old man with tired eyes and a soft smile, sitting on a wooden bench. Sky sat beside him, Flint in his lap, and behind them, just a whisper of a figure, a woman in white, not fully drawn just, a presence made of light and curve and shadow. She stood with her hand resting gently on Elliot's shoulder, her face half turned toward the sky. Mira slid it across the table without comment. Elliot stared at it for a long time. "Why did you draw her?" he asked finally. Mira didn't look up from her paint set. "Because she's still here. She just moved a little farther back." He swallowed hard. "She told Kane to stay behind," Mira added. "So now Kane is part of Sky, and Sky brought Flint. So, it's like a circle." Elliot looked at the two dogs sewn, old and steady. The other small and silent hand nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Like a circle." That evening, after Mira had gone and the house had grown quiet again, Elliot sat beside the heater with a cup of tea. Flint stirred, lifting his head slightly. His eyes blinked open. Elliot smiled, reaching down to rub his tiny paw. "You don't need to bark," he murmured. "You've already said more than enough." And Sky came over then and lay down beside them, head on Elliot's knee. And for the first time in years, Elliot didn't feel like he was carrying the weight alone. They sat like that for a long time, three quiet souls sharing the kind of silence that doesn't ask for words. The kind that means, "We're home." By spring, everyone in Crescent Hills knew who Elliot Ray was. Not just the quiet man on the third floor. Not just the grumpy one who never waved back. Nohei had become something else entirely. Something of a legend. The old man with the sky dogs, the kids called him. At first, it started as Whisper's small-town curiosity wrapped in half-truths. "Did you hear he rescued a girl from the burned-out tower? I think the dogs talked to him. My cousin swears one of them never blinks." But slowly, the whispers turned to warmth. Elliot, Sky, and Flint became part of the landscape scene every morning, walking the edge of town, passing the playground, then circling back along the abandoned trail behind the old firehouse. Sky walked ahead, steady and silent. Flint, now stronger but still quiet, trailed close behind. Elliot kept pace with them both, cane in one hand, Mira's drawings tucked in the pocket of his coat. It was Mira's idea to name the trail. One day, she brought a wooden board, hand-painted with crooked blue letters and sparkly star stickers. She had wrangled a few friends from school and convinced the mayor's assistant to let them put it up at the park's edge. The sign read, "The Waiting Trail." Underneath, "Where old souls watch and new ones begin." Elliot cried when he saw it. He didn't try to hide it. It was one of those moments where hiding would have felt like lying. So instead, he knelt beside the sign, rested a hand on Sky's broad shoulders, and whispered, "They see you now, old boy." The trail became a place for people to pause. Some came with coffee, others with stories. A few came just to sit near Sky or stroke Flint's soft fur. The dogs didn't bark. They didn't need to. Their presence said more than noise ever could. At home, Elliot had started writing again. It began as a notebook he kept on the kitchen table, just scribbles at first. Bits of memory. A timeline of sorts. But it grew. Every evening, after feeding the dogs and tidying Lena's room, he'd sit at the table and write. About Lena. About Kane. About that terrible night. About how long it had taken him to come back. Sometimes, he wrote letters to the past. Other times, he wrote to the version of himself who had waited too long. Most nights, he ended each entry the same way. "I'm not leaving this time." Then one morning, something extraordinary happened. It was early, the kind of early where the world still feels asleep. The sun hadn't fully climbed the mountains yet, and the porch was blanketed in soft blue light. Elliot was sipping his tea, watching Sky nap near the door. Flint sat curled by the railing, ears perked. He looked up at the birds, tilted his head and barked. Just once. It was short, rough, and hoarse. But it was a bark. Elliot froze, the mug halfway to his lips. Flint blinked, as if surprised at himself. Then he barked again, just a breath louder this time. He turned toward Elliot and gave a little shuffle forward, tail thumping once against the wooden step. Elliot's eyes filled with tears. He set the mug down, knelt beside the pup, and touched his tiny chest. "You found your voice," he whispered. "You really are here now." Sky joined them, pressing his head gently against Elliot's side. The three of them stood in that morning light for a long moment, no noise, but the wind in the trees and the flutter of bird wings above. Later that day, Elliot took them both to the rooftop, the very same rooftop where he had first seen Sky standing across the way. The burned building had long been fenced off, but from up here, the sky looked wide and clean. The town stretched quietly below, unaware of just how far the old man and his dogs had come. Elliot sat on a folding chair he had brought up from storage. Flint curled beside him. Sky lay at his feet, eyes scanning the horizon like he always did. The wind brushed his face gently. The world, for a moment, felt still. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the last page of his journal. He had written it the night before, unsure if he'd ever read it aloud. But now, it felt right. He unfolded it slowly. "Lena," he began softly. "I know now. You never asked me to forget. You just waited for me to remember." His voice cracked, but he kept going. "And I do. I remember the garden, the way you sang when you thought no one was listening. I remember Cain's tail knocking over your flower pots. I remember that you always said love wasn't about holding on it, was about letting someone feel safe enough to return." He looked down at the two dogs, a guardian, the other a spark. "I think we've returned now," he whispered. He folded the paper and held it to his chest. Behind him, the wind carried the faint smell of spring, and in front of him, the sky stretched open blue and endless. He smiled. "Some love never dies," he said. "It just waits until we're ready again." Sky didn't move. Flint didn't bark again, but both stayed close. And for Elliot, that was more than enough. If you made it here, you felt it too, the quiet ache of a goodbye long overdue, the soft miracle of a voice returning after silence, and the strength it takes to love again after loss. Stories like Elliot's aren't rare because they never happen. They're rare because most people never speak them. But here, at Vale Marks, we believe stories like these deserve to be heard, not just once, but remembered. The path we walk in life doesn't always have a name. Sometimes it's just a feeling, a waiting, a whisper. And sometimes it leads us right back to what we thought we'd lost forever. As one old soul once said, "Love doesn't end. It only waits for the heart to catch up." If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone, of something, or maybe even of yourself, please leave a comment. Let me know. Every word from you gives this channel the breath to grow. And when you subscribe, you help us get one step closer to 1,000 souls walking this journey with us. That's not just a number, it's hope. It's why we keep writing, keep creating, keep remembering. Thank you for watching. And until the next story, stay open, stay kind, and never stop listening.